Ready to go at the back? All up? Fingers up. Let's go. Welcome and thank you for attending. I should start by welcome to country, as we're out in the esteemed town hall with some names of those that have been lost in wars, etc. So for past, present, future, people of our First Nations community, I say a welcome to you all, and also on behalf of our First Nations people. If you could turn your mobile phones off, I'd appreciate that. My name is Andrew Plimpton and I'm chair of this foundation. I'll give you a little bit of background about my experience in the field of sport administration and business administration. Joining us today are a number of AFL players, many that are known not only for their on-field success, but many that have got issues confronting themselves with concussion and all the matters that rise out of it. We have interested family members, we have, so I say, the media, welcome to you. Board members of the foundation, including Peter, Jess, who will be speaking, Jenny Bromley, who will be speaking, and we have Professor Mark Cook, who was a very welcome visitor, Mark, to address the performance for Olympic and Paralympic sports people. I was on the Australian Sports Commission, the Australian Institute of Sport, and with the Australian Olympic Committee. I'm still involved with sport and very much appreciate the opportunity to continue my presence in that field. Perhaps on a personal note, as president of the St Kilda Footy Club, as many of you players would understand, captains of footy clubs and presidents not untypically have a good relationship, and so I went through that deterioration and seeing the actions of what happened to Spud and obviously Anita long after he retired, and seeing what evolved from the family. So I'm sympathetic, I'm understanding of it, and I do note the comments that have been made by the AFL, and then I go and see the players that have been affected in playing this game, and frankly they just don't reconcile. Peter has been with this, and it's been a long journey for Peter, Jess. Indeed, my time at St Kilda, it was required by me to have a constant interaction with Peter, Jess, as a player manager, and what a wonderful time that was, Greg. He used to twist people's arms, he used to undertake meritorious achievements in getting deals done, and from there, back in the early 1990s, we formed a relationship and have remained good friends since. And I acknowledge and appreciate the work you've done, as I'm sure the whole AFL footy community does, Peter, with your strident position, and you have remained resolved to do something about the matter which we're here for today. Some 6 years ago, I became involved with Peter and also with Ben Davidson, a partner of Cause. The experience that I brought to the table was understanding what was happening through a company that I was advisory director of, and that was Aon, a global risk management company. And we had broad experience with the National Football League. We understood the concerns that professional contact sports around the world were having. We made presentation to the AFL, led by Peter, but also supported. Regrettably, it didn't get where we would like it to be, but we've pressed on it, and our focus is to continue to find solutions, particularly long-term disability solutions of people that have incurred disabilities. In creating this foundation, our objective is utilising best practice and take a leadership position in safer sporting environments. We'll get to hear from Peter and also from Mark. Some key points to ponder, and these matters will be expanded on by Professor Mark Cook, who follows me, and then Peter Jess, the CEO of this foundation, is that contact sport athletes are at least 68 more times likely to develop CTE than those that don't play contact sport. In junior sport, that is up to 18 years, Australian football has the highest level of hospitalisation of any team sport in Australia. Concussion is the #1 cause. AFL return to play protocols are not judged by the experts best practice. Chris Nowinski, PhD, neuroscientist and celebrated author from the USA, makes the following comment. Australia is lagging the developed world in concussion, mitigation and management. This research foundation have a number of targets and recommendations. We outline those recommendations later this morning, and I know Peter is very keen to speak of it. In creating this foundation, we are conscious of our need to find funding and assistance from global panels of experts and from contribution from others. As Peter and I discussed this morning, we will be having discussions with the Danaher Foundation. I hope to engage with Anita to understand from the Frawley Foundation of how we can collectively work together. And obviously with the work that's been done, and I see you down there, Ken, with the work the Fifth Quarter and others are wanting to do, our spirit is, and what I learned from dealing at the IAS, is cooperation and collaboration and finding ways that we as a group can come together and do things collectively. Perhaps not clearly understood, but it is worth noting, and I know many of the athletes in this room have been the beneficiary of Peter's advice and assistance, that Peter has undertaken in excess of 200 tests on past players for neurological damage. The results are disturbing. Those tests have come at a cost of some $1.1 million. $1.1 million. And effectively they have been funded by Peter. Peter will talk, and I have a letter from the Australian Government in regards to what it is committed to do about concussion. And it understood, if I understand it properly, Peter, the contribution is circa $380,000 so far. This is not a $380,000 problem. Effectively, we've formed a board of directors. We want the discipline. We want people involved with this organisation that have all an understanding and needs to act in a collaborative spirit with an independent board. We will be relying on external medical expertise. And with that, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Professor Mark Cook. For those that many of you will know him, but his background is a Melbourne-based neurologist who's highly qualified in many areas of experience in the treatment of movement disorders, especially in the field of epilepsy. Professor Cook is recognised internationally for his expertise in epilepsy management, particularly imaging and surgical planning. He has also clinical interests in neuromuscular disease, multiple sclerosis and Parkinson's. After completing specialist training at Melbourne, Mark wrote a medical doctorate thesis whilst working in the UK as a brain research fellow at Queen Square. He returned to St Vincent Hospital as a professor and director of neurology, and under his leadership has become one of the largest units in Australia for surgical treatment of epilepsy. More recently, his interests have included experimental models of epilepsy and seizure prediction. Mark is currently Chair of Medicine at St Vincent's Hospital. Mark, I welcome you to make some comments.
Thanks for the introduction and the opportunity to speak here today. As you've heard, I'm a neurologist and I run a department at St Vincent's, and I'm also the Chair of Medicine at the University at St Vincent's. And for a long time I've been seeing patients whose main problems relate to brain injuries, traumatic brain injuries of one kind or another, often which lead to epilepsy, which is how I often interact with them, but also people who have brain injuries for a variety of causes. We've known for a long time about chronic traumatic encephalopathy, and we recognise that in the setting of conditions like dementia pugilistica, where boxers would get this terrible dementing illness from having their heads repeatedly hit, they'd develop Parkinson's type syndromes, as we saw most famously with Muhammad Ali. It was a very well-known phenomenon. But what we didn't realise, I think, for a long time was this was like a big iceberg floating off the coast. We're seeing just the tip, the most severe cases. What we didn't realise for a long time was that repeated minor injuries cause serious brain injury. And this has really come to the fore in recent years, with the recognition, especially amongst our sportsmen, of the long-term consequences of these injuries. And I just don't think we've had any idea about it. But we do know now. And what we know most of all is that we need to try and stop it. But to do that, we need better methods of detecting it. Because at the moment, we don't have any reliable techniques to recognise this condition. Who might be vulnerable? What tests we can do to accurately assess people who are suffering it? And how to intervene early. These are really important things that we need to sort out immediately, because this is a condition which starts very early in life, as young people play the vigorous sort of contact sports that we enjoy in Australia. Now, no one wants to stop Australians enjoying their sport. What we do need to do is find out smarter ways of getting them to play and better ways of figuring out who's getting injured. And in the long run, we need to figure out ways to get this fixed. The consequences of these injuries are immeasurable, and I don't need to tell our audience here today just how these conditions affect people's life, because I often see people with epilepsy complicating head injuries, obviously, and even trivial head injuries can double your risk of seizures. So your brain does get injured even with small events. But there are other consequences in terms of people's thinking, how well they can manage their day-to-day life, how it affects their mood, how it sometimes makes them wonder if it's worth it. And we see in the media now so often the terrible outcome of these situations. We can't ignore this, but for a long time we've been trying to, and I guess from my perspective, the most puzzling part has been, we know about this, why are we trying to ignore it? Now, part of the problem is that it's kind of hard to figure out in a way. People have known for a long time you play sport, you get your head banged, and so what? You know, you get up and you run around again, you're okay, but you're not. It's like any other part of your body. If you damage it repeatedly, it doesn't get back to normal. So we've had trouble accepting that. But then having recognised it, there's a bit of anxiety, I guess, about accepting it. And there's many levels there. Players don't want to accept it to some degree. Fans don't want to accept it. Administrators don't want to accept it. And people responsible ultimately for the care of the consequences of these injuries don't want to accept it. And these are all the things we need to change. Now, this is a magnificent step towards achieving that, and I want to pay tribute to Peter, who, through his persistence, devotion and passion, has really got us to where we are today. And he's a remarkable guy. I mean, I've known Peter for years, and he's always just been such a true believer, advocating for this and really making a difference. So I think this foundation gives us the opportunity now to make some real progress. And through the scientific part of the program, which I'll lead up, we'll be looking at devising ways of trying to determine who's being injured, figuring out who's more vulnerable, when to stop, how to treat it, what the best advice is to them, and ultimately set things on the path to find better fixes for this terrible condition. So thank you to the other board members who've also obviously been instrumental in getting this thing up and going, but most of all to Peter. Thanks once again.
Thank you, Mark. And opportune now, we've been generous to Peter Jess, Greg, and that's not usual for us to be so kind to him for such an extended period of time. Peter, take it on board, and we look forward to a contribution and a discussion from you.
Thank you, Andrew. Right, this has been a journey. And as Mark said, the turning point has got to come when the community decide that they need to back us. And that is what needs to happen. We've seen the process whereby over time there has been a gradual shift. But even today, we have people who deny that there is long-term neurological damage from repeated head trauma. Now, what we're finding is that if we don't have a regime of testing, you cannot, at the starting point, understand the structural integrity of somebody's brain. So I've been at the AFL for a number of years to say we must have a foundation of having everybody tested at the start of their career, and then everybody is tested at least twice a year and after every clinical concussion. Now, that may sound invasive, but it is the only way that we can have a proper concussion management system, because if you don't understand the structural integrity of somebody's brain, it is impossible to have a sensible concussion management system. That, for me, is a non-negotiable point. I'm trying to get that across to the AFLPA, and it should be mandated in our CBA. At this point in time, it's not. But I am hopeful that we start to press to have a concussion passport. And the concussion passport should not only be for the players at the peak levels, it should be for every person that plays a contact sport. Then we'll be able to have a global view of their brain health from start to finish. And then this will give us the opportunity to start to put in place proper return to play protocols that are based on science. If we have a look and see, the guiding light is the Concussion in Sport position paper, which has been the key reference point for a number of years. Now, in that, I have written to the government and said that this document is not safe. One is, it does not and persists in saying that concussion is a transitory brain dysfunction. As Professor Mark Cook stated, that if you have damage to your brain, it is permanent. It's not transitory. So we've got to get past this notion that you actually can get better. In most cases, you can manage it, but if you have repetitive concussions over a period of time, you will find that you will suffer permanent dysfunctions, and that in itself is what the basis of encephalopathy is. It is structural and functional damage that results from repetitive trauma. Now, what we found is that in a number of the testing regimes, they weren't sensitive enough to actually pinpoint damage structurally to the brain. So we have engaged in multimodality tests, and the AFL's testing regime for the 600 players that started in 2014, of those we had a number of players then come to us and said that they had been tested and treated and found to have no damage. Well, when we did subsequent tests, we found in one case, one player had 70% of his brain damaged. In other cases, it ranged from 20%, and the average was between 25 to 30% of the total brain had been damaged. And that meant that there was permanent dysfunction of behaviour, which manifested itself for the families and partners in things like rage and anger management, excitability, where they increased their risk-taking. And along the journey, it gets to a point where once the neurodegeneration kicks in, slowly but surely, the next and the worst outcomes is when people decide that they no longer want to live and take their own life. We don't have, at the moment, a national sports suicide register, that then can be followed through. But this is something that we need to start to think about seriously, because we know, that the most at risk are not only the elites, but the sub-elites. The paper produced by Professor Pearce clearly showed that there was exactly the same levels of damage happened in the weekend warriors than it did at the senior levels. And this is why we need to create a unique concussion hub that has all of the skills necessary to do the testing, treating and rehabilitation of this insidious disease. I've been not so patiently pushing the AFL. My dealings with them, I would say, amount to total frustration. They seem to be monolithic in terms of change. So maybe it's revolution rather than, the evolution needs to happen, whereby the community rise up and say, enough is enough, we need to have proper funding, we need to have proper science, and then maybe the next quantum leap will take place. I think I, for one, will not be sitting back and watching the slow death of a number of my players. It's just wrong philosophically, and we need to change the view. We need to have a proper funding system now. I approached the AFL March 21, and I have a text back from the AFL telling me that it was presented to the AFL in the April of 21. It is now November of 22, and I think we're all none the wiser of what that compensation fund is, the timeline as to when they're actually going to deal with players. My problem is that there has been significant funds spent on inquiries that are circular and have not recommended any clear pathway that we can then reduce the number of concussions in the sport generally, and specifically in the elites and women's. We have targeted that we should have a reduction in brain traumas in the elite sport at men's and women's of 25% per annum. Now, that's only a number that we drew from because we just think it is totally out of hand to think that we can have a continuum of brain traumas happen in our sport at all levels and not do something sensible and specific. This is why we need to have a review of the return to play protocols. My view is this, is that without testing on day 1, day 7, day 14, day 21 and day 28, we actually don't know, because if you don't do the tests, there is no way that you can manage concussion in a sensible, scientific and proper way. We also need to invest in rapid point of care diagnostic tools. As Professor Cook said, is that we need to know the immediacy of the injury and then the extent of it. We have machines available in our medical consults whereby we can test various biomarkers that will give us the results that we need to know within 24 hours of not only the type of trauma but the extent of the trauma. And this is not used on a global basis in our sport, and it must change. So I'm not going to bore you with more. What I'll say to you is that now's the time to draw the line in the sand, and we must have the community get behind us and push for change at every level. This is a humanitarian disaster that I have not seen in any other first world country, the extent of it. We have at every level men, women and children who have terrible life changes from brain traumas. And our next speaker will give you a life view of that. It's Jenny Bromley. Jenny, whose partner is Dizzy Lynch, who I've known for probably 40 years when he first played in the AFL and then in the VFA and in the bush footy. And he is unfortunately a living example of what happens. Jenny, I now welcome you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Peter. Thank you. I'm honoured to speak today and be part of a board with such passionate and such capable members. Today, I want to use this opportunity to really provide Dizzy with a voice and provide a voice and a platform for all the families that are so devastated and significantly affected by the long-term effects of repeated concussions. Dizzy Lynch was an elite footballer who played many games of football for VFL, AFL, the range of country and interstate clubs. All of his life he was passionate about football, and in his later career he became a very highly regarded coach and loved working with players, young players, junior teams. He was also an elite runner who was immortalised in the Hall of Fame at Stawell and still holds the records for the record amount of distance races won in the 1500 and the 3000 events. He's a dad of 4 beautiful children, Josh, Sam and Tom, and a grandfather of 3 amazing little children, Spencer, Poppy and Harvey. He had a dynamic personality, he loved people, he loved looking after people. He was a very hard worker, he owned hotels, and he was devoted to his family, his football and his fitness. Now, at 68, Dizzy is in full-time care at an aged care facility. Dizzy suffered more than 20 severe concussions in his long career, a time when head-high tackles were part of the game. About 6 years ago, he really started to show the effects of those concussions and started to suffer memory loss and changes to his thought processes. 4 years ago, Diz was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, and it was also identified that many of the symptoms that he had indicated he may also be suffering CTE. In the following years, his conditions has continued to deteriorate. He constantly struggles with his short-term memory and sometimes had no recollection of any conversations. He struggled in conversation, in group situations, and he found it so difficult then to contribute and keep up with what was going on. He started to lose his independence and he was unable to drive, and then, much to his disgust, he had to give up work. He continued to slow down in so many areas of his life, particularly in simple daily tasks, including dressing, showering, dressing, hand-eye coordination. Reaction time slowed down. He then became disorientated and struggled to interact with the family and with reality. He began to have hallucinations sometimes, and he found it difficult to function safely when he was alone. In the past year, his condition deteriorated to such a stage he could no longer stay at home safely. So we had to make the heartbreaking decision for Dizzy to enter full-time care. One of the saddest days of our lives was when, accompanied by my really young sons, we had to visit aged care facilities to choose which one would be best and suited for him. Our family continues to grieve. I think we grieve for the loss of their dad, and we had to find this place for him, to live the rest of his life. So our family does continue to grieve. They grieve for the loss of their dad, for the vibrant, outgoing, athletic role model they have grown up with. The Dizzy that they've got now, who spends much of his time confused and distant to reality. They grieve for the fun and the laughter they once shared, to be replaced by long, silent pauses and confused conversations and hallucinations. He finds it really challenging to engage in conversations, but ironically, the thing he constantly reverts back to is his memories of football, and he lives in his past, in the football days. His passion was so much. It's very challenging for our young family to face the reality of Dizzy's home as a place where he shares with most of the people who are 20 to 25 years his senior. We're constant visitors to the home and take Dizzy to many things. And we're grateful when we get to see the small glimpses of the Dizzy we once knew. We now have witnessed his condition continuing to deteriorate. When I was preparing this speech, I started to look at my emails and the contact that I'd had with the AFL and the AFL Players Association. What I found was the many emails that I had written, but only a very few responses that I'd received. The AFL and the Players Association were really not interested in Dizzy's situation. They didn't really want to discuss it. The information on their websites, and really they're just words. They spruce about what they can do, but there's no substance or support. Often they took weeks, sometimes months to respond. I think I had one online meeting with them, and ironically the thing they offered to me was a one session of counselling. I think the very situation of lack of care and support and the lack of responsibility that the AFL and the AFL past players is taking for concussion research, and the lack of support for AFL players is taking for the people that played and part of their alumni, like Dizzy and so many other ex-players, will become the next major issue that may rock the AFL, similar to what racism has. As a family, we're really passionate to make sure that some good comes out of Dizzy's situation. We want to help make sure that less players in the future do not have to endure what has happened to Dizzy and our family. We continue to advocate, and we did suggest to the AFL that we vigorously want to promote community education and awareness in relation to concussion. As a board, we are all determined to make a positive change on a national scale, and we hope we can help develop community education campaigns and programs that are designed to protect athletes at both local and national level, and will make all athletes of all codes safer and build concussion awareness and education about the brain and education about concussion. As a country, Australia lags behind in that education. The AFL could lead this area. We hope that we can work with the AFL to promote concussion education, and a week next year be part of their fixture. They have a lot of causes. This cause is so important. In closing, before I finish, I would like to acknowledge the work Peter has done and the support he has shown Dizzy and our family, and the passion and determination he's shown to make a difference for so many people and to make the sport so much more safer. We know sport is the fabric of our culture, and we just want to make it safe. We would also like the AFL and the AFL past players and the AFL's Research Board and Occupational Health and Safety Committee to do what they say they do and look after the players and advocate and support and provide enough funding to make our sport safe. Concussion's real, CTE is real, and the long-term effects are very real to the players and to the families and the community. Throughout Dizzy's life, he gave so much to the sport he loved. Now it's taking so much away from him. Thank you.
Under the circumstances, beautifully done, Jenny, and thank you for that. Sorry? I will. So there is a lot of stories out there, and I think one of the things that we take away from this is that in many ways it was always regarded as a one-man show of Peter Jess, and inverted commas articles used to say players manager Peter Jess. Effectively, this foundation is going to come together as one. We're going to speak with one voice. We're going to involve others. We've got to have a voice that incorporates the broad community. Many of you are sitting around this table today, because we'd have to say, Peter, that the efforts that we have made in a business sense and in a personal sense to a body such as the AFL has not been heard. It has been dismissed. We have been removed from their agenda, and I would suggest that the players have not benefited those that have given so much to this game. So it's up to us to do this with a foundation. It's up to us to embrace people. It's up to us to be disciplined in our approach and use, as we do with Professor Mark Cook, the best advice we can get. Peter, you mentioned that Stephen would probably like to stay. I ask on any past player, anyone in the room that'd like to make any comments. Would anyone like to make any comments, Peter?
First of all, thanks all for coming today. Obviously, as Jenny said, concussion is real and it is a real problem with our sport. We're not saying don't play football and all that sort of thing, but it's just how we manage if you do get concussed. And coming back 1 week later is irresponsible on behalf of the AFL. Obviously Peter's been fighting the fight for years and years, and it's fair to say I don't reckon I'd be standing here or be on this earth if it wasn't for him. The guy's a legend. He obviously got me back on the map, got me back in the land of the living, and I think it's, there's guys here that are really doing it tough. And there's, Brownlow medalists here that the AFL won't help. If they can't help someone who's given that much to the game, who are they going to help? So we just need to keep fighting the fight. Obviously, if I was a boxer and Peter was in the other corner, I'd be shitting myself. So I can't say that. Can I say that? It's fair to say he doesn't go down too easy, if at all. To hear stories from Jenny, it's heartbreaking. It's not just the player who suffers, it's also family and friends. And I know my family's suffered a lot. My kids, I missed out a lot of time with my kids and my ex-wife, and we're still good friends to this day. She's a wonderful woman. The hell put a lot of partners through was off the charts. So, this is great that we're doing this, and just hope the AFL listen at some stage. There is a real problem out there, and we just keep fighting the fight, and we will eventually get somewhere, I know, with all the support in this room. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Smithy, and heartfelt again. So if anyone else would like to make any comment, please do so. We've got an audience on YouTube, so if there's anyone that would like to make a comment, if not, I'll be happy to wrap up the day. Or is there any questions that anyone may have? Peter? Yeah. Okay. So perhaps I thank everyone for attending. I thank everybody for their input. I don't want to repeat this for the third time, but this is something that's going to happen with this if we act collectively, collaboratively, and we listen to everyone's opinion. The stories that around I'm sure, going to emerge, and it's a conversation I have in the park just recently with Nick Rewalt, the captain of St Kilda, one of the bravest footballers ever. Nick's got 3 young kids, we just live close by, and the conversation gets to this point. I don't know where I'm going to end up, but I just look and ask of the AFL of more work to be done. So to all of us in sport, it's our job to assist, and that's what we're here for. Thanks for being with us today.
What we need to do is make sure everybody understands the dangers and make sure that they understand what precautions that they need to take. We need to draw a line in the sand and say, right, we need to have better return to play protocols, we need to have each of the sciences that surround that to make sure that that happens. And we've got to get proper funding.
Can I just ask Mark a question? Mark?
Yeah.
I'm just curious about degenerative diseases like CTE and also Parkinson's and dementia and Alzheimer's. That we see a lot of old ex-players getting those diseases. And for me, I guess I'd like to know, because I've had my fair share of knocks as well, but could that be a genetic thing, or is it something that's caused by concussions? And then how do we evaluate that? And then I just think that there's a lot of players now that we see that are really suffering from mental health players that could quite easily be because of concussion.
Yeah.
But it hasn't really been spoken about enough, I don't think, about the cause, what the consequences could be, and what studies there might be. I mean, we tried to do some research out of the States, and they say that I don't know how many multiple times are you more likely to get these degenerative diseases by one concussion. So I don't know whether there's any studies around that.
That's right. So we know from a lot of studies that people who have repeated head injuries, and sometimes even one head injury, are more at risk of all of these sorts of problems that result from the surface of your brain being injured. The surface of your brain is injured often enough, you get scars, which cause things like seizures, cause the sort of tangles and changes in the brain that occur in Alzheimer's disease, and damage the parts of the brain in the brain stem, which links the top of the mushroom to the stem, where the control mechanisms that operate the movements in Parkinson's will. So we know all of these areas are damaged by repeated trauma, there's no question about that. I suspect that there is a significant genetic component, because some people don't seem to suffer these consequences and others get them very early on after sometimes minor injuries. And I think that's a big challenge for us, figuring out who's susceptible. That's going to be a big part of it. I mean, everyone's going to be susceptible to a degree. Your brain's a soft organ, like jelly, literally, in a hard box with sharp edges inside. Shake it around and bang it, you damage it. I mean, that's pretty obvious. But for some reason, we can't accept that, and we don't have good ways of looking at the damage that's caused by it. There are new scans and tests evolving, and they're going to answer the questions I think we've raised, because at the moment it's still very hard for us to see on the kind of imaging technologies we have, the very early stages of the development of these problems. There are methods evolving, but it's still pretty early. In Alzheimer's generally, that's true. So there's a lot yet to be fixed. But I guess recognising the problem and being able to talk about it openly is a big part of that. And people understanding that these might be consequences of something they've done a long time ago. So we've got a lot to learn. But I think all of that you've said is correct, that all of these conditions are certainly caused by repeated head injuries. Other things cause them too, but they're a significant contributor, maybe the main contributor for many.
Just with those the head knocks, someone like a Ray Price, NRL player, I used to watch a guy play, when I grew up in Canberra. The guy was an absolute warrior.
Yep.
And he got whacked a lot, and he's now suffering early onset dementia or Alzheimer's or whatever it is. But is that really just CTE? I mean, you can't really say now that, because they do give the same sort of symptoms, don't they?
That's true. So people might get these conditions anyway, but what we do know is from the small number of brains that have been studied from professional players, that they almost all have these changes.
Yeah.
So we know this isn't something imaginary. We know it's actually there. You might say, well, there are sample people who might have thought there's something wrong, and that's why they've donated their brains and being studied, but there's more to it than that. So just about all of them are an example like that. I remember the turning point for me came in the 90s when that American ice hockey player had a post-mortem in his brain, and it was on the New York Times. I don't know if you know, it's a broadsheet New York Times, had a huge picture of a slice of this guy's brain and all of the injuries caused by use of hockey play in Korea. A young guy, who obviously died early. And you could see these changes. There's no question about what happens. Might happen to everyone, but it does happen.
Jenny, can I ask you a question? Thanks for sharing your story. Just in relation to talking about the lack of support you receive from the AFL
about education, about, you know, like we don't want, you know, this is where he's at, and it's not going to improve, but we just don't want that to go in vain. We want something to happen from it. And I'm in education, so I said, you know, we really would like to get things happening. But they told me that, you know, they educate their playing pathway people very well. And I said, well, what about the thousands of other people that are sitting out there in country football, but not just country, but the whole scheme of sport. It's not just football. So I think just that, I don't know, you know, really to acknowledge that, you know, that acknowledgement even, and maybe even support with, you know, his care or things like that. I don't know, you know, like I was just looking to see, you know, what support he played, you know, it's an injury that he played with, you know, so.
I guess, well, it's just recognition.
It's
isn't it?
recognition,
People accept
you know, that, you know,
the
it's
contribution.
yeah, and that's very true. Yeah.
And like with a lot of, especially neurological illnesses, but a lot of it, from the patient and the family's point of view, is just having someone who knows what's going on and how it happened.
Yeah.
Even if you can't fix it, that's
right.
something.
But also that it doesn't happen to other people, you know, that, you know, and I think too, it's not just educating, you know, I was talking before, it's about educating the media. You know, now even there's discussions going on, and I remember with the grand final last year, or with the girls' grand final or whatever, and a girl had suffered a head injury. And there are people, and high profile people sitting at Fox Sports talking about how they'd take the AFL to court if they weren't allowed to play in a grand final. So what's that about? You know, that's putting that above people's health. So I think we've got a long way to go.
Well, I think that's absolutely right. The education part of here is critical, because there is still, I mean, it affects, you know, everyone. It's just this thing we have, we're not willing to accept this, because we've seen people playing sport around all our lives, having all these things happen to them, and it's hard to join the dots, because the consequences are a long way down the track, and you don't see them, and that's a problem. And would people do the same things in their sporting life? And would you train kids the same? Would you expose them to the same sort of situations in any other? I mean, let's say it was an industry where you got your head banged and this happened. It'd be an industry out of business pretty quickly.
And you know, in other countries, which I think I just touched upon, is that they're educating about the brain very young. So kids know that, you know, if they have hit their head, what to do, and, you know, like even little kids, and that it is an issue, and you've got to follow it, and if your friends hit their head, how do you look after them? It's that even basic sort of education that then goes, you know, into the board.
I think the biggest thing that's coming is the women as well.
Yes.
Like they go that hard, like it's horrendous, and they can't protect themselves, and the umpires just sit play on. It's just ridiculous. And then you've got under 10 girls playing under 12s, and you know, like that's just a nightmare going.
And there's some evidence that they're more susceptible to these injuries.
Yeah.
So there's a problem on the horizon.
I think too, just with the AFL, it's not just about money, giving players compensation and stuff, which players do need, but generally the outcomes of CTE are heavy drinking, gambling, poor behaviour, you know, just, so if you just gave them $5 million, there you go, they guarantee it'll be all gone really, really quickly, because they'll just drink it or punt it. So it's a balance between, yes, we need to give them some money to help them live their life, but also there's got to be an avenue where you can go for concussion. As Jenny said, there's plenty of places you can go. You can get an orthopaedic surgery, get your knee replaced, and that's quite easy to do, whereas there's nowhere to go, absolutely nowhere to go for your brain. So it's...
Unfortunately, Smithy's a good example, because he's come from the worst place you can be, last you can be. Try to kill himself like this. Sorry, Smithy, but it's shocking. And then for what's happened to you, it actually come good. And you're really, like I'm saying, so healthy for years. It's a great effort. But what you actually did, and that's what we need to be able to show people where to go.
Survive,
Where to go, this is the person you see.
And it was two things. It was obviously, or three things. Help was one thing, and then obviously
Care, like someone.
Pete got me some, you know, an insurance claim that I thought was impossible, which put me back on the map in that regards, and thanks Pete for that. Thanks. Yeah, still scratching my head how you did it. But it's also education as well, and testing and getting testing done and saying, well, I'm not stupid after all, it's just I have a brain injury. I'm acting the way I am because of I have a significant brain injury. And then, you know, since then I've really researched the brain a lot, and, you know, just natural supplements and all these sort of things. I'm off a lot of medication and everything like this, so it's, but that takes money as well, because it's not cheap doing that every month, every day, going, you know, doing courses and things like this. So it is money, but it's also education and guidance and help.
It's purpose too, to have a purpose, isn't it?
Correct.
Everything's
Yeah.
been taken away from you.
Yeah, so 4 years ago I was in a world of hurt, and you know, it's, as I said, I'm not sure I'd be sitting here right now if it wasn't for Pete, and as well. Alan Pearce did testimony and said, so you're not stupid, it's just broken. But there is hope. If you are broken, there is hope you can rewire, maybe not repair, but rewire your brain to function better.
Smitty's doing good work and making things. And
Yeah.
It's just.
So thank God for YouTube. Just put the YouTube
neuroplasticity program that we've been working on is, you know, that if you take the steps and you can rebuild your brain, right? But it's never going to go back to what it was. What it does is give you the ability to cope better. It slows down the early onset of the issues because you're actually creating new neural pathways. And, you know, whilst they don't supplement the total balance of your brain, what it does is give you a position where you can have a better quality of life over a longer period of time. The one thing, and Jen you know, mentioned it in her talk, is that we need to have a week of awareness, and this is why we want to have, you know, Concussion Awareness Week.
It's a great idea, though.
Which is, you know, Jen is going to produce for us the underpinning of that with, you know, the education piece that we can then roll out to schools. We were aggressive in the last couple of months. We sent out a flyer to 3,000 schools telling them this is what is happening with you know, concussion with your children. You need to make sure that you are advising the kids. We also sent it out to the, you know, councils that provide the facilities and saying, well, you need to ensure that you provide a safe workplace. You know, that is one, I mean, whether we should do it or not doesn't faze me. You know, the fact is this is that people know about it because we've confronted them with these are the statistics, these are the facts. So the responses that we've got back from schools, it's fascinating, is that it tends to be the country schools take more notice than the city schools, which I'm not sure what the dynamics of that are, but that is a fact. With the councils, it was the same. It was a country, you know, council. So obviously in the communities, they are seeing it. For me, because I'm in Avoca every Saturday, I observe young kids playing football, and the mothers will come and ask me, is this the proper treatment regime? What they had at Avoca is that if you got a concussion, you stood out for the mandatory 12 days play, but you came back with a helmet. You know, no testing. You just simply came back with a helmet. And I said, no, this is what's got to happen. You've got to have a proper test. But they said, well, we went to the doctor, we went to the hospital. The doctor who they saw was very good because he said, no, ignore the 12-day protocol. I don't want your son to play for 28 days. So I was reasonably happy with that. But they didn't have, and they said that they didn't understand the testing regimes that they were looking at. So there's this huge knowledge gap, right, throughout the community about what you can and can't do. And I think Mark, you know, touched on that, is that, you know, it's a piece we've got to fund properly. You know, you've got to have proper testing regimes. If you don't have them, like as I said before, it's like looking at a motor. If you don't lift up the bonnet, you never know what's wrong with your motor. And this is what tests do. It, you know, gets inside the bonnet. And this is where we need to be to understand the structural integrity of the brain. Because if the structural integrity of the brain is impaired, you are going to have repeat dysfunctional behaviour, because there's parts of your brain that derive and have the functionalities, especially in the frontal lobe, that's a key executive decision-making function. Once it's damaged, you actually are going to struggle to come back to normal. You'll always be dysfunctional in some part, and that's what we've got to try and work on.
And you've got to get out to those volunteers, because,
Yeah.
for, country football clubs, they're full of volunteers, and you've had, an hour's training or, like the further you go out, the less training they probably had, and they're actually dealing with the same concussions as they do the AFL. And what's going to happen with them. And there's still got some people out, a lot of people out there saying it's okay.
But Jenny, even your I've got a 10-year-old or 9-year-old grandson like this, he's playing AFL and loves it.
Yeah.
Not tackling him, which is good. But what about your 10-year-old going to play footy like you were saying? No, we don't want to play.
No, I don't.
At the moment,
No, I don't want him to play at all. And I've got 3 sons, and they're all really good players and played all their lives since they were, this high. I'm actually, football's in my blood. I'm a Lockett, so, Bellair Lockett. So, I'm really, it's been entrenched into my blood. But now, if I had my time again, I'd be driving a bit further than the footy ground, and I'd be going to the soccer. They would have been playing soccer. If I had known what's happened to Dizzy now, I wouldn't let them go through, because they're players that have had a lot of head injuries. I was saying to Steve, and they're quite worried. They're at 27 and 28, one at 21, and they're really worried. So definitely my grandson, I'd rather him play anything but footy at the moment.
But even soccer, they can't hit the ball much. In soccer world, countries they're stopping them hitting the ball.
Yes, but not here.
The brains aren't, the skulls aren't closed over yet. They're still soft.
I think one of the frustrating things that has come out of this also is the work we did in the United States to look at NFL football, was that NFL football clubs, not like the AFL that are owned and we have a commission. There is a structure of something which is interesting, which is private ownership.
Yeah.
And to bring private owners together and give them a view that things have got to change, and to get agreement from private enterprise, which is, they're there effectively to make money, but also social conscience. Just put the sport a long way ahead in the sense of comparing it to where our sport is, that has got the magnificent opportunity to speak with one voice, but doesn't speak with one voice.
That's exactly right. And their education and everything is so much better.
I just doing a bit of research around that, because we're trying to get Fit for a foundation up and running. I've met with the AFL and the AFLPA, and it's quite interesting that the NFL, and there's the NFL Players Association, the NFL Hall of Fame, and NFL something else. They came together to open up a care foundation in recognition of the magnificent contribution that former players have given to the game to help build American football to what it is today. So they've really taken a proactive stance about, looking after their past players and support, whether that be through concussions or whether it be through, coming to a job or whatever it is. And it's quite interesting. The AFL, when I've spoken to them, when I'm trying to say to them that a Fit for foundation could actually complement the AFL and the AFL Players Association as a support mechanism for people that need help. Now, like the Eugene, that saddens me that that you emailed the AFL Players Association and you didn't get a response, or if you did, it was like months later. I mean, that just shouldn't happen. That's terrible. That's just a lack of respect.
Lack of respect.
It's terrible. So there is a long way to go for all of us in what we're trying to achieve. And Peter, Peter's been nothing but supportive of the board as well. So,
Well, that's the voice of all of us, and that's a collective voice.
I've got to go, guys. I've got to go and try and make some money. I'm a struggling suburban accountant, as you all know.
Well,
Thank you.